This is Midong Solar Farm. Just 2 years ago, it was nothing but an empty desert. Today, it stretches across an area twice the size of Manhattan and produces enough electricity to power a small country. At first glance, this looks like just another flashy Chinese megaproject, but it's part of something much, much bigger. For decades, China's greatest weakness has been energy. The world's factory runs on oil, but almost none of it comes from home soil. Every day, China imports over 10 million barrels of the stuff, most of it passing through waters patrolled directly by the US Navy. One blockade and its economy would grind to a halt. That may sound alarmist, but not to Beijing. Its answer is something no superpower has ever tried before: to build a nation that doesn't need oil. This dot is the Midong Solar Farm, and this is every solar farm in China. Last year, they generated enough energy to power France and the United Kingdom combined, and most of them didn't even exist 3 years ago. But this is just the beginning. China generates even more energy by wind, and even more energy than that by hydro. In early 2025, clean energy made up nearly 40% of its electrical supply. At this pace, China's yearly output will soon rival the entire European Union. And if Beijing can power its economy without imported oil, America loses one of its last major pressure points. And in a world where energy independence means strategic freedom, Taiwan suddenly looks much more vulnerable. Under Biden, the White House fought back, with billions in green subsidies, attempting to take on China at their own game. Trump, on the other hand, has championed a different philosophy.
Today I will also declare a national energy emergency. Drill, baby, drill.
While Washington's energy policies shift with each election cycle, Beijing is playing a different game entirely, one that could reshape global power itself. Because if the world's largest oil importer no longer needs oil, what happens to everyone who still does? Amongst other things, China's biggest headache in recent years has been securing reliable access to enough energy to fuel its economy. From potentially retaking Taiwan to escaping the middle income trap, energy security has been the ball and chain holding China back. Today, they're by far the largest energy consumer in the world, and they're eating through more and more every year. Every nation that uses more energy per person tends to live better, and in China, that demand is still accelerating. Not only have they got to fuel the second largest population in the world, they also have to power a manufacturing industry that eats through vast amounts of fuel. Initially, like many countries, Chinese industry relied on coal to satisfy that appetite, and nobody has a bigger appetite than China. Half of the world's entire coal is now being consumed by them, almost 5 times more than the next biggest country. The good news for Beijing is that they mine most of it themselves, but the bad news? That self-reliance comes at a steep price. For the past few decades, Chinese cities have often looked like this. This isn't just an eyesore. Pollution shortens people's lives, burdens the healthcare system, and drags on productivity. That's why, as countries get richer, they tend to shift more towards oil and gas. They produce less pollutants, are more flexible, and are better suited to dense cities and modern industries. But here's where China runs into a problem. Unlike coal, they don't have much either of gas or oil at home. Domestic oil is hard to extract, and gas reserves are scarce. So to fill that gap, they have to look overseas. China's energy mix hasn't shifted dramatically, but its total demand has exploded. That surge means it now burns far more oil than ever before, and imports far more crude than any other nation on Earth. The same story applies to natural gas. Domestic output can't keep pace, forcing China to become the world's largest importer of both oil and gas. However, importing this much energy comes at a cost. OPEC decisions, wars, and international crises can send the price of oil and gas through the roof at a moment's notice. For China, those price spikes are a problem. That's because, as the world's factory, their economy is still built on razor-thin margins. Those price spikes don't just dent profits, they stall orders, cut shifts, and slow exports. Without a cheap, reliable energy base, sustaining China's next leg of growth becomes nearly impossible. However, this is only one part of China's vulnerability. Currently, over 90% of China's oil and liquefied gas arrives by sea. And those tankers cross contested waters patrolled by the US Navy and its allies. Near Taiwan and across the South China Sea, American ships routinely cut through zones claimed by Beijing, a constant signal of US control over the seas. And then it gets even worse. The route narrows to a single bottleneck, the Strait of Malacca. Almost 80% of China's crude oil from the Middle East squeezes through this corridor. If China ever decided to invade Taiwan and Washington intervened, this strait could be shut down to Chinese shipping, sever the flow to energy, and China's economy goes into meltdown. Refineries lie idle, factories shut, and exports collapse. The Strait of Malacca isn't just a strategic choke point, it's China's Achilles heel. This is known in Beijing as the Malacca dilemma, and unless they find a solution to it, China is simply too vulnerable to consider taking Taiwan by force. If an American blockade could cripple their economy, the social contract with the Chinese people would be broken. And without a strong economy, the lack of political freedom becomes less justifiable to the general population. That's why achieving energy security is an essential step towards achieving China's foreign policy goals, including their ultimate goal of Chinese reunification. So, Beijing has a serious problem. It has to manage an industrial economy dependent on imported energy, which is priced elsewhere and then shipped through routes it doesn't control. If they ever wanted to seriously challenge America's global dominance, it must first address this problem. So, the dilemma is simple. How do they remove the ball and chain and finally achieve independence? Fortunately for China, they're already halfway there. In 2025, only 5% of their electricity came from natural gas, and virtually none came from oil. And since the rest of their electricity comes from domestic sources, they could technically keep the lights on and the grid stable, even if America shut the Malacca Strait tomorrow. So the solution to the Malacca dilemma is simple: move everything onto the grid. For every machine that switches from oil and gas to electricity, it's one less pressure point that could be turned off in a blockade. And you're already starting to see this happen. Electric and hybrid vehicles now make up a majority of new car sales in China. For energy independence, the importance of this cannot be overstated. Electrifying road travel would almost eliminate China's reliance on oil imports, as well as making China's roads immune to the effects of a blockade. And electrification hasn't just stopped at cars. The same story repeats itself for railways, buses, and electric heat pumps. In fact, China is on track to become the most electrified major economy in the world, having already overtaken the United States and developed European economies. Every step away from oil and gas and towards electricity is another step on the road towards energy security for China. But here's the catch. While this success is helping solve their energy security, it's also making another problem worse. That's because, despite all their gains in electrification, their greenhouse gas emissions are still by far the largest in the world. While this may seem contradictory, the main reason is actually relatively straightforward. Most of China's electricity still comes from coal-fired power plants. So, going electric has the unintended consequence of making their addiction to coal more difficult to manage. However, fortunately for Beijing, they have an ace up their sleeves, because this is where the renewable energy projects that we mentioned at the start of the video begin to come in. In 2021, Beijing didn't just announce a renewables plan, it made it a national priority. And that signal travelled fast. Local authorities were handed generation targets, public land was unlocked, and planning officers were told to fast-track renewable projects. At first, it was the state that took on the risk, investing more than $625 billion into green industries. But soon, the private sector followed their lead, and competition heated up. Economies of scale were reached faster than anyone expected, and costs collapsed, especially for solar and wind. Contracts were completed early, projects came in under budget, and politicians had to start thinking bigger. They built gigantic power lines to connect solar fields in the west of the country to the population centres in the east. They built energy storage to store the electricity that wasn't being used. And once they were ready, they started building the renewable generation itself. Giant solar fields began appearing in China's deserts, and offshore wind zones fanned out along the eastern seaboard. And today, all that effort is beginning to pay off. In 2024, they added over 500 terawatt-hours of renewable energy generation to the grid. For context, that's enough to power Germany for a year, and more than the rest of the world managed over the same period. And they're expected to add even more in 2025. If they keep this up, they'll achieve net zero in their electricity generation by 2055. So, renewable generation is killing two birds with one stone: energy security and pollution. Smog clouds will clear, Washington's leverage will evaporate, and the path will open to retaking Taiwan. But even this doesn't capture the extent of China's ambition. Recently, it became clear that their push into renewables is about much more than just domestic construction and clean generation. Instead, Beijing is positioning itself to dominate the supply chain for the entire green economy. Already, Chinese firms dominate the global market for the minerals that make green tech work: lithium and graphite for batteries, rare earths for motors and turbines, and copper for the wires to tie it all together. And then, when it comes to manufacturing, they dominate again, producing most of the world's batteries, solar modules, and turbines. Even when it comes to construction, their ambition hasn't stopped at home. State-owned companies now export China's model, building solar, wind, and grid projects around the world as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is why this isn't just about self-sufficiency. China has made itself an integral part of the global green energy transition. For Washington, that's a problem. In order to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels, they will have to increase their reliance on Chinese supply chains. And in a crisis, this could be used as a point of leverage. China could restrict access to critical minerals and components, damaging America's energy industry and hurting the economy. Soon, the roles could be reversed, and China could hold all the cards. While Washington is aware of this risk, opinions on how to respond have been divided, and the response disjointed. In 2022, Biden passed the Inflation Reduction Act, unleashing $825 billion in green energy subsidies over the next decade. Much of this money came with strings attached, requiring American companies to build hardware at home and restricting technology sharing with Chinese counterparts. On top of that, the White House increased tariffs on Chinese EVs, solar cells, and batteries to prevent American companies from being outcompeted in their domestic market. Finally, Washington had put together a comprehensive strategy into motion to take on China at its own game. And it seemed like the writing was on the wall for America's giant fossil fuel industry, along with the millions of jobs that go with it. But then an election happened. On the first day of his presidency, Trump sent out a clear message to the world. He pulled out of the Paris Agreement and signed the Unleashing American Energy Executive Order. Government agencies were told to fast-track drilling, fossil fuel subsidies were increased, and policy was tilted back toward oil and gas. Overnight, it was now the green energy industry that had an uncertain future, and millions of newly created jobs were cast into doubt. Either strategy could be effective in reducing Beijing's leverage over America's energy supply. However, the lack of consistent direction from Washington poses a problem. In such a volatile environment, it's just too risky for private industry to invest in either solution at the scale that's needed for it to work. So at the same time that China is transmitting a clear long-term vision for their future, the White House is hamstringing America with inconsistency. For ordinary Americans, this could be a disaster. Policy whiplash is likely to result in rising bills, a less reliable energy grid, making it harder for households to get by and for businesses to stay afloat. Even worse, if America doesn't decide on a consistent plan of action soon, China could gain a permanent leverage over their energy supply. This would give them the upper hand in the struggle for global dominance before it is even properly begun. Against this backdrop, security and sovereignty are back at the center of US policy. Liberty Defense Holdings, ticker LDDFF, in the US market and the sponsor of today's video, available on Interactive Brokers, Schwab, Fidelity, and E-Trade to name a few, are a firm developing next-generation threat detection technology for airports, stadiums, and government facilities. Liberty Defense has attracted attention from agencies like TSA, DHS, DOE, and Los Alamos National Laboratory, with exclusive licenses, cutting-edge patents, and government-backed R&D. Despite raising $45 million to fund product development, the company's stock is trading near its all-time lows, with a market cap of roughly $16 million, a fraction of what it has already raised to fund development and deployment, creating a potential inflection point for investors watching the evolving US security landscape. The company's flagship product, HexWave, was developed from the research at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory and advanced through partnerships with the Department of Homeland Security and Transportation Security Administration. It's a walkthrough portal that uses millimeter wave technology, 3D imaging, and AI to detect both metallic and non-metallic weapons in real time. Unlike traditional metal detectors, HexWave identifies plastic and 3D printed weapons while scanning up to 700 people an hour without requiring them to remove jackets, shoes, or personal items. This makes screening faster, less invasive, and more accurate, key to the TSA's goal of modernizing security while cutting costs. The system has already been deployed at Los Alamos National Lab, and the TSA recently awarded Liberty Defense a sole source contract worth $6 million. This includes the HD AIT upgrade, which is the TSA's quest to retrofit about 1,000 body scanners with the new high-definition imaging technology. At a unit cost of $100,000 each, that's a potential $100 million rollout. The upgrades replace older scanners nationwide, with additional orders expected soon, and the TSA has already granted Liberty Defense with a $4.5 million sole source contract. These contracts are significant because sole source agreements are only granted when a company's technology is considered uniquely capable of meeting specific federal requirements. And with the TSA's April 2026 mandate requiring all US airports to begin employee screening for concealed threats, demand for Liberty technology could surge over the next year. Liberty Defense is also seeing early traction outside the United States. One of the largest international airports in the country has selected HexWave for worker screening, and a correctional facility in Bogota, Colombia has purchased the system without any mandate. In short, Liberty Defense is positioning itself as a leader in next-generation security scanning, combining cutting-edge technology, exclusive government relationships, and growing federal mandates. With shares near historic lows and a series of upcoming government rollouts, it's a company worth watching closely as the US pushes to modernize its security infrastructure. Visit libertydefense.com to learn more about the HexWave system and its role in redefining public safety.